that's a Norwalk bed. So that's kind of my favorite.
Did you happen to catch Stephanie Meyer on Oprah yesterday?
No, I sure didn't. She's doing pretty well these days, I imagine.
I wasn't even interested in that whole thing because I don't like vampires or wars. And the interesting thing is that she basically downloaded that whole thing from a dream she had.
Wow. I had not heard that.
She explained it. She was an avid reader. She had never even written so much as a short story. And, stay-at-home mom with 3 little kids, stifled for years. And anyway, one day she had this dream, and that was the core of the first book.
Right.
And she just started writing it. And her sister encouraged her to get it published. She didn't even tell her husband.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And
Well,
people love
that's
those
the problem
stories.
is that there's too much stuff. So the real fact is there's actually global warming may not necessarily be what a lot of the doomsayers say it is, but it's definitely climate change. The climate does change very quickly. And because of that effect, forestry just a bunch of cuts because they really should have done controlled burns. That's why I get crazy.
All right, I think we're about ready to get started here in a couple of minutes. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. We have an outstanding guest speaker with us. Kevin Watson is going to come on down. You're the next contestant on The Price is Right.
All right.
So we have these lav mics.
Was it good?
We're prime time. We're streaming live on the internet over there, actually. I don't know if you got anybody watching, but we'll get a few people on there. So this looks like that.
Trying to behave myself and not knock that loose. So you get the big mic.
Yeah, this is the big face covering mic, I think is the key here. As they say, I've got a face made for radio. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. My name is Stacy Cochran, and I am the organizer for the Raleigh Right to Publish group. I'm absolutely thrilled to have Kevin Watson with us. Kevin is the founder and senior editor at Press 53. The format for these events, for you guys who have been here before, you know, I start with a few kind of canned questions, and then we'll open it up to questions from anybody here that you have for Kevin tonight. So tell us a little bit about the history of Press 53.
Well, Press 53 started out as a means of not going crazy. I was a writer, am a writer, short story writer, had been published and won a couple of awards, and after I lost my day job working for U.S. Airways, after 9/11, a lot of things happened and they were cutting back. I lost my job in 2004. I started looking for ways to maintain my sanity. So I was doing some workshops, and then I thought, I really enjoy sharing writing with people. And I had edited a short fiction anthology in 2001 for a New York City-based arts foundation and enjoyed that process. I enjoyed reading, finding stories I like, publishing them and sharing those with people, other readers, and finding readers who agreed with me that, yeah, this is good stuff. So I like the process of not just finding the stories, but designing the book and laying out the book and imagining the cover. So I started teaching myself book cover design, took some art classes, how to lay out a book, bought a program where you could do that. and basically started there. Word got out pretty quickly that what I was doing. I touched base with a couple people I published in the Silver Rose Anthology. One of them, Doug Fralke, who actually lives here in Raleigh, fantastic writer. At the time I met him, he was at Harvard and had moved back to Raleigh to find work as a teacher. And we were having dinner one night, and he said, I've got this collection of short stories that's going into its third printing, but I'd rather work with you. Again, I had such a good experience. Would you be interested? And when I started Press 53, I thought it would just be a local press, that we would just do something in Winston-Salem, where I live, try to find some local writers, publish a book or two a year. And then when Doug offered me this collection of stories that I had read and I loved, I thought, well, maybe we could branch out a little more to Raleigh, maybe make it a regional, I could be a regional thing. And then I got another email from a gentleman I published in the Silver Rose called Tom, his name's Tom Sheehan, and he lives in Saugus, Massachusetts, and said, I've got this collection of short stories that nobody seems to want, would you be interested? And then I thought, well, maybe I could just be an East Coast publisher. And then somebody else contacted me, and pretty soon I was getting all these submissions from short story writers who had these wonderful collections of award-winning short stories that nobody seemed to want to publish. So I got busy very, very quickly on this. That's how it got started, basically.
Let's talk a little bit about your motivation to start the press. That's a little bit of the history from Milestone's perspective, but what was really kind of driving you to want to start a press? You lost your job, it sounds like, after 9/11, is that right?
Right. Yeah, and I think what drove me...
So you said, I'm going to get rich by going into publishing.
Yeah, well, still waiting for that to happen. In a former life, I was a songwriter in Nashville for 10 years. I spent 10 years there with my younger brother, who's here with me tonight. And I remember when Michael Johnson came out with this CD called Wings. And it was some of the best country music I'd heard in a long time. And I think I bought and gave away 24 of those CDs to people because I just love sharing. And I like being around writers. I like being around other artists. So my motivation in starting Press 53 was the opportunity to find work that I liked and share it with other people. So that was kind of the sanity part of it, is that I wanted to get more involved, become more involved. I knew that if I liked something, that I was sure there were thousands of other people out there. I'm still convinced of this, that I'm such an average guy, that there are thousands and thousands of people out there who would agree with me if they were aware of it. So that's the challenge, is finding the writing I love and publishing it, which is why I don't publish for the marketplace. I don't think about, is there a market for this book? Is there a market for short stories? I mean, my gosh, short stories are starting to come back now. They're gaining more recognition. And it's always been my belief that they'll come back into favor like they were back in the 40s and 50s, which seems to be the case now.
So who were some of your first authors, and how did you acquire the rights to publish their books? Were these people that you knew? Talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mentioned that Doug had moved from Harvard down to Raleigh, and I was doing some workshops in Winston-Salem called Saturday Retreats for Writers. And get together once a month on a Saturday, and I'd bring a writer in from somewhere, and we'd do a whole day's worth of workshops, and we'd limit it to 10 people who could take this class. And Doug came in to do one on the art of revision. He's a master at revision. So when I told Doug, just in kind of confidence, that I was going to start this little press, word got out pretty quickly. So it shows you can't trust writers at all. You keep your mouth shut. But that was a good thing, because pretty soon, I mean, word got out, and I had another friend of mine, Cheryl Monks, who I graduated Salem. I went to Salem College, the oldest all-women's college in America. So I'm a very proud Salem sister. Earned my sisterhood because I went to school every day with these 20-something women who just kicked my butt. So I wear my sisterhood proudly. But Cheryl was a graduate of Salem College and an award-winning short story writer, and she shared my ambition for sharing stories. And she came on board. She actually asked me if there was something she could do to help out. And I said, well, I've got all these manuscripts, and I really need a good proofreader, a good editor to look them over, and because I'm getting busy. And one thing led to another, and we partnered up. I actually brought her on as a partner shortly thereafter. So in January of '06, we formed our partnership at that point. And we started getting submissions, I mean, literally by February. I opened the press in October, and by February we were getting submissions from all over the world. Every continent but Antarctica. We're still waiting on that. And I know there's some writers in Antarctica, but just waiting. But
With a great, Antarctic thriller or something.
that's right.
So it sounds like you were able to immediately have writers be aware of the press. How did you market the early books? What are some of the ways that you were marketing the press to get that name recognition out there?
Well, it shows you the power of the internet, number one, that we just had to put it out there. And it's almost like The Secret. You all seen The Secret? It doesn't work with the lottery like they say, because I've been trying that. But really, if you put it out there, if you have the energy and you put it out there, and it's something you truly believe in, and something you are putting your heart and soul into, I think people pick up on that. There's some kind of energy out there. All we had to do is basically say, yeah, we've started this little publishing company, and because Cheryl knew people, because she was a writer, I knew people because I was a writer, and I'd been published different places, that word got out via the internet very, very quickly. So we were getting, I know before we published our first poetry collection, we just kind of put it out there that we were looking for poetry, and we had over 100 submissions, poetry submissions in a week from all over the world. So it was, the internet's basically the marketing tool we use. It's a great way for people when they like something. It's the new word of mouth. It's just an extension of word of mouth.
So what role has the independent bookseller played in Press 53's growth?
Well, if it weren't for the independent bookseller, our books wouldn't even be out there where people could walk in and buy it. The big block bookstores aren't interested basically in what the small presses are doing. They don't seem to get it. And the independent bookstores like Quail Ridge, which I love Quail Ridge, this is where you'll find the real book people, the people who actually read. I was at a bookstore recently with one of our authors, and he talked to the lady who was the manager of one of these big block stores, and he told me that he went up to her and said something, and she says, well, I don't have time to read. I don't read books. So that kind of tells you something, but when you walk into an independent store like this, you'll find books that are tagged, that so-and-so who works here recommends this book, so-and-so actually read this book. So that's the advantage. When you look around in the store, if there are any aspiring authors here, I'm absolutely blown away when I walk into a store like this and see thousands of books on the shelf, and I think, how in the world would somebody find my book if I had a book in here? And the way that happens in an independent bookstore is the people who work here know what they have. You go to the big chain bookstores, and they might as well be selling cornflakes. They really don't know what they have for the most part. So the indies are the place to find what you want to read.
So can you talk a little bit about the distribution side then? So you've got a press. What's a typical print run for some of those early books, and then how do you get those books into the stores and in the hands of readers?
Well, this is interesting. When I started this press, I didn't know anybody who had a lot of money they wanted to lose. So I started, and I still use Lightning Source. It's a print-on-demand company. It's a division of Ingram Publishers, the largest book distributor in the world. So my books automatically get U.S. and U.K. distribution as part of using their services for print-on-demand. I don't rely on bookstores just ordering the book. Because your book's sitting on a shelf somewhere doesn't mean somebody's going to buy it or find it. You've got to get people talking about it. You have to encourage people to share that with them. And the lucky thing is when you find somebody who loves a book, when they find a book they love, they talk about it. They really enjoyed that book, they will talk about it, and they'll share it with somebody, they'll hand it off to somebody, which I don't recommend giving books to people to borrow, because that's how the best libraries are built. So the distribution side is we very heavily market on the internet. We hold readings at stores like this, the small independent stores, where the people who work there will get excited about a book or an author and will hand sell that book. So I would imagine somebody who comes into this store a lot, that the people who work here know that person and know what that person reads and knows what that person likes. So if you get somebody who comes in and they know that person's a poet or reads poetry or a short story writer or somebody who reads short stories, that they might reach over and grab a Press 53 book and say, have you read this yet? Do you know this author? So that's what we're counting on.
At the risk of putting you on the spot a little bit, where do you sell most of your books? Is it in independent bookstores? Is it at conventions? Is it online?
The bulk of our sales are from the authors themselves. I'm very particular about what I publish. It has to be something I love. But I'm also very careful when I choose the author I work with. I want an author who's out there. I want an author who is mixing it up, who's attending the conferences, who's doing the workshops, who's getting published in journals and magazines, someone who's constantly putting their name and their face out there. For example, we've got a couple of books on the table over there that we published recently. Mary Akers has a book called Women Up on Blocks. Mary has a blog. She's a writer, but she also blogs about books. If she reads a book and she likes it, she will blog about that book and invite that writer, send a note to that writer and say, I just blogged about your book, and come take a look at it. And that writer, having huge egos like all writers, myself included, will tell everybody they know, hey, so-and-so just blogged about my book. Well, Mary has a blog that is constantly getting hits. So when we published Mary's book, now, something I'll say about Mary's book, it's a fantastic collection of short stories. But the manuscript sat on my desk for a year. And it sat on my year because I didn't like the original title of the book. And I thought it was kind of boring. And so every time I would look at my reading stack, which continues to grow, be like, okay, what am I going to read? And if it was a title that really grabbed me, I would grab it and read it. Well, finally I read Mary's short story collection and loved it, thought it was wonderful. So I contacted Mary and I said, are you really locked in on this title you've got for the collection? And she laughed and said, Tom Lombardo, who happens to be my poetry editor now, who was someone who went to Queens with her, said, Mary, this is the wrong title. The title should be Women Up on Blocks, which I thought immediately was a great title. Well, we put Mary's book out there. Within a week, we sold 150 copies just on a pre-order basis because people knew who Mary was and they were familiar with some of her writing because she'd been published in different places. So that's one way to answer your very brief answer to your question.
Sure.
That we do to sell these books.
I think that's insightful, and I think for a lot of small presses, there's probably a similar answer to that, in that you are aware of who's at these conventions, at writers' conventions, who's kind of the movers and the shakers, if you will, in publishing, and you've got your finger on that pulse, and so if a book comes to you from Ed Southern, for example, Ed's got a presence.
Right.
So I think it's an important thing, a concept to be aware of as writers.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about how your background in the music industry, you mentioned the one thing where you were handing out CDs, but was there anything else that sort of prepared you working in the music industry for book publishing?
Oh, yeah. In fact, when I talk about writing, I'm constantly referring to the music industry. I think if writers and publishers want to see what's happening in the literary publishing world, look at what's happening in music. I know several of my friends who had the big deals, RCA and MCA and Capitol and all that, have begged out of their contracts or not re-upped their contract with these big labels to start their own labels, to book their own tours, to produce their own CDs, because they don't have to sell as many and they can make a lot more money, and they're in control. They're in control of that product. Never before in history have writers been able to control their futures as they do now. You don't have to wait for someone in New York City to bless you and say you're a writer. You no longer have to wait for that all coveted book review from one of the big reviewers that will make it in the newspapers. We, for our reviews, we send books out to bloggers, people who are blogging about books. People who are there with the readers, talking to readers who are reading what we're writing, what we're publishing. So you can go directly to those people now, which is what we do. We go directly to the reader and try to hang on to them, try to give them a reason to come back and visit the Press 53 website, to go to their independent bookstore and order the book.
Quick question. How many folks here are aspiring writers? So we've got a room full of writers. So what kind of work do you look for at Press 53?
What I like. I publish what I like. But here's what I like. I like stories. I like original voices. I like writing that is compelling as far as interesting, quirky, edgy, that doesn't toe that line, that's not a method, like method writing, things like that. I want something that's original, but yet that voice has to resonate with me. And believe me, I've passed on a lot of stuff that is really good. I know it's really good. But the fact is, when I publish a book, I've got to read it 3 or 4 times during the editing process and layout process, and I don't want to be sick of it. I don't want to hate it. But there again, even then, and this is important for anybody to know, that for my small press, I have to make sure I've got an author who's out there, who's working hard, who's getting published in other places. If I have 2 manuscripts, and this happens all the time, I've got a manuscript here that the stories are really, really good, and this author's been published in a gazillion places, and they're teaching workshops here, and they've got a presence, and they're active and submitting, and they've got their own blog, they've got their own website, and I've got another manuscript here where they've been published a little bit, and they don't have a blog, they don't have a website, but the stories are just as good. Who am I going to work with? You know, I mean, and the practicalities of it is I'm one person. I don't have the power right now to make anybody's career. I don't have that Copper Canyon thing. If Copper Canyon publishes somebody's poetry manuscript, people all over this country are going to buy it because they want to know about that poet that Copper Canyon selected, because Copper Canyon is known as the place for poetry.
But you're getting there. Press 53 is definitely one of the more talked about small presses in the state. You're getting
That's
there.
true. In fact, yeah, recently a book blogger in Seattle referred to us as that kick-ass press in North Carolina. So yeah, I'm proud of that. It's cool.
That is
Yeah.
cool. So what is the best way for an author to submit work to you at Press 53?
I have a little different approach to the submissions, and I'm working on this. I'm constantly refining it. Rather than having everybody just send me manuscripts that I have to work through, I like to build relationships. It's important. The couple of times that I've gotten into a situation where I published a book that didn't do well is because I didn't know that writer well, and I didn't know what I was getting into, and the writer didn't know what he or she was getting into. So I suggest that writers drop me an email. I've got my name plastered all over the Press 53 website. You go to the submission page and it will tell you right up front that drop me an email, say hello, tell me who you are, keep in touch. If you get something published somewhere, send me the link. Tell me who it was published with. If you want to make a photocopy of it or whatever, send me the story, send me the poem, and let's start building that relationship. And then over a period of time, when I have someone who's made an impression on me and I've read some of their work and I really enjoy it, then I will invite them to submit a manuscript to me. So it's almost like the boutique press where we don't have submissions, we just pick what we want out there, but yet the submissions are still open. I'm encouraging a dialogue, so that's basically the process. I want to build friendships.
Sure. Do you receive work from literary agents? Excuse me.
I do. Yeah, I have probably at least a couple times a month I'll get a query from a literary agent, and more times than not it's something I'm not really interested in. A lot of the agents are interested in pushing novels, which I'm not interested in, memoirs, which I'm not really interested in, unless it's someone I have a relationship with. For example, this next year we're publishing a novel by Valerie Neiman, who teaches at A&T. And we published her poetry collection. It was the first poetry collection we ever published at Press 53. And she handed me her novel manuscript. And I'd read some of Valerie's short stories that she had published by a small press in West Virginia. University of West Virginia Press actually published that. So I'm a fan of her writing, and I know by working with Val that she's a hard worker. She's a great marketing person. She's doing workshops all the time. She's out there. She's constantly getting published, which is another thing. When she brings me her novel, it's not like that I have to do all the marketing for that. I mean, what Valerie does, because every time she gets published somewhere in her bio, it'll say she's got a novel, or she's working on a novel. So the marketing is built in somewhat in that regard. Plus, she's got a good following. But because I know it's going to be, it was a clean, very clean manuscript, and I love the story, wonderful writing, we took it on.
What can you tell us about the writing contest that you've had at Press 53?
That was born out of frustration. When Cheryl and I would have these conversations, and Cheryl left about a year ago. Her father passed away, and very tragically, and she wanted to get back to writing full time, and she's teaching part time now. So I think of her, I miss her all the time. But we'd have these conversations, and we were always frustrated because during the submission times we would be able to pick, okay, we're going to do 2 short story collections. And we'd have to turn away 5 or 6 that were really good by writers who were clearly deserved to be published. And all we could do is say, well, I'm sorry, but we have to pass on your work, but best of luck to you. And we thought there's got to be a way to publish more of these writers, so we thought of this contest. And we thought of doing a contest that was multi-layered, where we had poetry, but it wasn't just, submit your poem, but submit 3 poems that are judged as a group. So if you've got 1 great poem and 2 that are so-so, you probably won't win. And we have judges that are outside Press 53. It's all a blind read. So we get industry professionals within the industry to judge this. We have flash fiction, which is becoming very, very popular. Stories up to 750 words. The short story up to 1,500 words. The short story, creative nonfiction, and novella. So there are 6 categories in this contest, which allows us to publish a lot more writers. And what I've done this year, or what I did last year, is we published the top 3 in each category. And we got submissions from 33, I think it was 33 different states and 8 foreign countries. And our judges, to give you an idea, we've got Zinta Asters, who is the editor-in-chief of Smoking Poet out of Michigan. It's a top-notch poetry journal. We have Tara Massey, who just edited the Rose Medal Press Field Guide to Writing Flash Fiction, is our flash fiction judge. Let me see, Lise Funderburg, who is a regular contributor at O Magazine, is doing the creative nonfiction this year. So we go out and we find people who are really active in the industry and doing things and ask them to judge, and they get these manuscripts that are no names on them, just numbers. So that's based totally on the writing.
How about, you and I had met at the SEBA trade show, which is a great conference for booksellers and small presses and publishers. What other kinds of conferences would you recommend, Kevin, for writers to go into? Which one should be on our radars that we should go to? Of course, there's the North Carolina Writers Network Fall Conference coming
Right,
up.
that's coming up next weekend at Wrightsville Beach, and I would highly recommend that. It's a great place to meet a wide variety of writers who are published, agents, editors, publishers, people, professionals within the industry, to really sit down and share ideas with them and to ask questions. The one thing that I tell people all the time is that the internet has made it so, has torn down so many walls. Writers and editors and publishers are so approachable these days. They're just regular folk. Very approachable. Book festivals are another great place. Every year for the past 4 years I've gone to the literary festival, the Carolina Mountain Literary Festival in Burnsville. I highly recommend this. It's the second weekend of every September. It's free, and they've got the most creative use of workshops and speakers and panels and discussions going on. And these people are walking around just milling about, and it's a great time to meet people who are doing different things in the industry and asking them questions that could help you.
I'm going to pass around an attendance sheet or sign-in sheet. Well, not attendance sheet. I'm not in class. Although it feels a little bit like it. If you want to sign in your name and email address, I can let you know about upcoming events that we have. So, do we have any questions from the audience? Go ahead.
How did you come up with the name?
53 is my lucky number. It's interesting, my brother who is here, when I was maybe 8 or 9, came in, we shared a bedroom. Almost through high school. It was amazing. It was fun, wasn't it? Yeah. And I just happened to ask him one day if he had a lucky number, and he said 7. And I thought, well, that's my lucky number. And I thought, well, we can have the same lucky number, you know. So I was almost offended by this. And I tried to talk him out of, you can't have the same number. He said, well, that's my lucky number. So I thought, well, I need to find a new lucky number. So I sat down and went through this whole process of, 1, that's boring. It's just, 2, yeah, then, then I thought, well, if it's just a single digit, there are probably millions of people out there. If it's 8, millions of people out there. So I thought, well, I need to increase, So I started putting numbers together. And my favorite football players were the middle linebackers, because I always wanted to be a middle linebacker. But I was like, when I graduated high school, I was 6 foot tall and weighed 137 pounds. So, I couldn't be a wide receiver. I was a toothpick. So, but I settled on 53, and then since then it's followed me. Herbie the Love Bug, came out in 69. A couple of years later, 53, there it was. Nashville, I lived right off exit 53. All the big tractor trailers you see going down the highway usually have a 53 on the side because the bed's 53 feet long. I'm telling you, I started something.
You haven't lived with this number a while, have you?
Yeah, and it's been very lucky for me. So.
Tell us a little bit about the Surreal South anthology.
Oh, this was great. Pinckney Benedict and Laura Benedict, a couple of wonderful, wonderful writers who Pinckney teaches at the University of Southern Illinois in Carbondale. He also teaches at the MFA program at Queens University in Charlotte. And because he knew Cheryl from that program, he was keeping an eye on what we were doing with the press. And he approached us with this idea and said, we're thinking about putting together this collection of weird, odd, strange, genre-bending kind of stories, sci-fi, gothic, whatever goes. Would you be interested in publishing that? Well, this isn't what we publish. You know, if somebody brought to me and said, I've got this sci-fi collection or a sci-fi novel or sci-fi this, whatever, it's like, well, I don't do that. But what hit me was, well, it's an anthology, number one, of stories. And the first volume had poetry in it as well. I thought, well, you know, it'd be kind of fun, actually, to put something like that out if we came out around Halloween with that every year. And then Pinckney and Laura were like, well, we don't want to do it every year. You know, that'd be too much, but we could do it every other year. And then we realized that the first volume came out in 2007, which was an odd year. So I thought, well, Surreal South every odd year, that kind of makes sense. It's kind of apropos. So we just come out with our second volume. And it's odd. I mean, it's really beware when you pick that up. The cover art I found, which is something else we do, I use original cover art. I don't use any clip art or any stock photography on the covers. I go out and find art. And I found this photograph on Flickr.com where photographers from all over the world post their stuff. And take a look at the cover. We've got a book over there. It's scary. It really is. It's odd. And you know, and the crows figure into the two covers. And I think we're going to stay with that theme, that there's going to have to be a crow on the cover of each of those books somewhere on that.
Question here. Go ahead.
Does your poetry editor, I think you mentioned his name, Tom Lombardo, does he respond to all submissions, or do you respond to them, and just how long does it take?
Well, that's a good question, because Tom came on board in January as poetry editor, and we tried to get back in a very timely fashion. Tom got slammed this year with poetry submissions and had hundreds to go through. And what we do is we ask, send us 10 poems. They usually submit them to Press 53, and then I forward them to Tom. And just last week I saw him at Queens, actually, for the faculty or the alumni reading, and asked him how it was going. And he said, man, I'm so far behind. So he's working hard on that. We try to get back in a timely fashion, but I encourage Tom to get back directly with the poet, because he's the one making the decisions. I'm not making any decisions in poetry right now.
And that's the time when you invite or you don't invite?
Well, it would be if he likes the 10. If he likes the 10 and it resonates with him. Cheryl and I chose the first few poetry collections that we published based on the fact that we're storytellers. We're both short story, but I've had some poetry published. I enjoy writing poetry, but I don't consider myself a nuts and bolts poet. And I think Tom has that reputation, and a very good reputation in that regard. So I let Tom deal with that, and I'm very happy to do it, because when it comes to helping a poet organize that collection in a way that seems to fit and make sense, I'm not very good at that. I'm very good at that with short story collections, I think. But poetry, I want to leave that up to somebody who is a poet, and Tom, I think, is a really good one.
Sounds like one of the major strengths of Press 53 is that you've been able to find good collaborators and editors to work with. Can you talk about how that process is working? How did you meet Pinckney and Laura and some of these other folks that you've worked with?
Well, I can blame John Ely for a lot of this. John, if you don't know John, is a national treasure. He lives in Winston. He taught in Chapel Hill for years. He was born and raised in Asheville, so he's covered the whole state. But right after we got started with the press, we had a big coming out party at the local bookstore in Winston, and 200 people showed up. And one of those people was on the board for the libraries on the same page, which is the big community read program they have every year. And a week later, someone from the library contacted me and said, we want to celebrate John Ely. We want to put we want to do one of his books for the community read, but the book he would like to do is out of print. Would you be interested in putting this book back into print? And I didn't know who John Ely was. I had no clue who this guy was. And so I'm asking, well, how do you spell that? I'm sitting on my computer on the phone, and I'm typing in his name, and I start reading his bio that was on the North Carolina Writers Network website, and I'm thinking, holy cow, how come I've never heard of this guy? He's written 17 books. He's considered by a lot of people to be the father of Appalachian literature. He's the first writer to be considered to write about blacks and Appalachians without stereotype. He was the idea man for Governor Terry Sanford behind such great institutions as the North Carolina School of the Arts. The first ever governor's school in the country was at Salem College in the 60s, and it's now in 40 states. The School of Math and Science was his idea. The Film Commission was his idea. The guy's a national treasure. The Lyndon Baines Johnson created the first ever Humanities Council, National Humanities Council, from an idea he got from John Ely when he asked, what can we do as a nation? And then he asked John, would you like to serve? And John said, well, I can't, but maybe my friend Harper Lee would like to do it, So how come I've never heard of this guy? So we meet John, and we talk about bringing the Landbreakers back into print, which if you've never read the Landbreakers, he wrote a 7-book collection about the settling of the Appalachian Mountains, the first settlers, European settlers, to settle the Appalachian Mountains. And it was a 7-book series and runs from the 1779 all the way up to the Depression, the Great Depression. Wonderful series. In fact, just this last week, or a couple weeks ago, I got a call from Jan Karen. You all know Jan Karen? Yeah. Calling me saying, I just read The Landbreakers again, and I think this is the most important book ever written about the Appalachia area. Everybody should read this book. And we talked for 20 minutes about John Ely and how much he loved him. I get letters and emails all the time from people who are rediscovering his work or find it for the first time and are amazed. So when we met John, and we're a couple of kids who started this little publishing company, and we show him some of our books, and we show him our contract, and we're talking to him, and he chooses us over 5 or 6 other publishers who are thinking about republishing the Landbreakers. And I think it's because John likes a good adventure. And I think that's what he saw in what we were doing. But over lunch one day, I just mentioned to John, I said, the only reason we're even thinking about doing this, John, publishing Landbreakers, is because I think it's as good as To Kill a Mockingbird. Thinking I'd be funny and cute and the whole bit. Well, John didn't laugh. John he looks up and he goes, I used to know Harper Lee about 100 damn years ago. And Cheryl, not knowing any better, said, well, you think we could get her to write a blurb for the new edition? Yeah, that's what I did. I laughed. And he reaches in, pulls out his address book, takes a rubber band off of it, and he goes, well, here's her phone number if you want to give her a call. So Cheryl calls the phone number, and Harper Lee answers the phone. And they talked for 20 minutes about John Ely and how much she loves John Ely, and I'd be glad to write a blurb for you. Tell John I said hi, I love John, And then I'm thinking, and Cheryl's telling me this, I should have written down that phone number. And then when we got the handwritten letter from Harper Lee, when it came to me, and it came in the mail, and I'm looking at the envelope, and I open it up and start reading, and it says, Dear Cheryl. But then it got picked up. I think the Greensboro newspaper and the Winston newspaper and the Raleigh newspaper and every other newspaper around the country kind of picked up on this story that here's this little bitty press that gets a letter from Harper Lee. And then we were in the radar. We started, so I think Pinckney picked up on that and saw we were doing things. But he also saw that we were doing things we loved, that we were not trying to go after a particular market, but we were doing what we love, publishing work that we love. And he saw passion there, and he thought, that's a good home for what I want to do. I want to have some people working with me who have that kind of passion and drive.
Got a question over
That
here.
was a long answer, wasn't it?
It was a great answer, though. I love the story behind that.
Thank you.
A couple of things real quick. I just wanted to, not a question, but I wanted to mention to you that several weeks ago I bought a copy of Power of the Saints that you published by Ed Southern. And for me, it was tremendous. He writes about men. It's the kind of book that I would recommend also to women who want someone to understand how men become men or don't.
That's
It
interesting.
was tremendous.
That's interesting. You know, and if I could interrupt you there real quick, Parlous Angels by Ed Southern is a fabulous read. It really, truly is everything you said it is, that it captures the whole spirit of boys becoming men. And men realizing that, you know, we never really do grow up. We just get older. You know, I mean, you women, yeah. You know, the women are the one laughing if you can't see that. But it's true. And men are on that constant mission of who are we and where do we belong and the whole bit. And you capture that. And on the other spectrum, Women Up on Blocks, when I sent my brother a copy of that book, he called me and said, I got to tell you, I've been reading Women Up on Blocks, and I'm never going to take my wife for granted again. You know, I mean, that says a lot. So I appreciate your comment about Ed's book. I really do.
You also mentioned a festival in Burnsville. I didn't catch it.
The Carolina Mountain Literary Festival. Check it out. Burnsville, North Carolina, second weekend of September. And it runs from, I think, Thursday afternoon through Sunday. It's free. The people who run that are true book people. And the whole town is on board for that. They have panels or readings or workshops that they might have one at a restaurant, might want to have at a coffee shop or an art studio or just scattered all over town. It's all within walking distance. Burnsville is a very small town. In fact, I heard a story recently of Perry Dean Young, who wrote Two of the Missing. We just reissued that memoir, Vietnam memoir, Two of the Missing, and he's from that area. And he just wrote a play called Home Again about Thomas Wolfe. And he tells a story about Thomas Wolfe got off the bus in Burnsville at the square and stepped right in the middle of a gunfight with two of Perry's cousins, and almost got shot. He ducked behind a car, and they blew out one of the tires on the car while he was hiding behind the car. And he said a few weeks later, the cousins got into it again, and one of them actually killed the other one. So, but the Youngs are, I guess they're a big tribe out there in the Burnsville, Asheville area, but Perry's got some great stories.
I want to remind folks that we do have a tip jar to take up some money for incidentals and gasoline and that sort of thing. If you want to put some money in a tip jar afterwards, that would be great. Also, we're going to be going over to TK Trips, which is a fancy little steakhouse right across the parking lot here. Everybody here is invited to come. I'd love you all to come. We should go over there and have a big party and have a good time afterwards. So I'd love it if you'd come to TK Trips afterwards. Do we have other questions for Kevin? Over here, go ahead.
It's interesting that you talk about music and writers. Would we recognize any of your national music that you've written?
No. No. I was one of those writers who had several holds. You know, this is where they say, oh, we like this song, let me hold it for the next album. And it's like a 3 or 4 month period. And then after the album's cut, they say, well, we didn't cut it, and your song's been sitting there for 3 or 4 months, you know. I think they should put a deposit down. If they want to hold it, you know, throw some money my way. Because that went on for years. Did a lot of spec projects, you know, bands that are up and coming who are looking for something different. And so they'll record some songs, they'll grab some songs that are different than what you hear on the radio, which is what I was writing. My brother and I were both writing songs that were a little edgier and a little, you know, coloring outside the lines kind of thing that would get people's attention. But as soon as they got into the studio with the actual album, then the producers say, well, let's take the safe route and record what everybody else is doing. So we wound up with a lot of great demos, you know, that were spec projects or whatever, but no big cuts. No, wouldn't recognize the thing.
So what is the secret? I know nothing about professional songwriting other than watching, you know, A&E, the story behind Kenny Chesney or something like that. What's the key to breaking through as a songwriter?
Writing a song with Kenny Chesney. Or the producer. Seriously, I mean, that's one way to get in, is you write with the artist or you write with the producer, and that gives you a leg up. But when you look at back then, they were doing 10 songs, 11 songs for a CD, and the majority of those songs were written by somebody on the inside. One or two might be from a songwriter, so it's very difficult, very difficult. But if you're a great songwriter, I consider myself a good songwriter, maybe a very good songwriter, but there were a few that were great. And I look at my own writing that way. The very first book that I published at Press 53 was my own collection of short stories. And I did that for a couple of reasons. I did it, number one, because I needed a book to experiment on. Can I do layout? Can I do design? Can I do it right? And number two is because I knew if I took the time to find another publisher to publish that collection, that I wouldn't like the design or the layout, and they'd want me to go out and sell it for them. So I thought, well, why not do it myself?
What's the similarity between a great country song and a great short story?
Brevity. Every word counts. Every word counts. Images, conversations, got to be believable. When I do writing workshops, I tell people right up front, if I critique something or if somebody else in here says something about this not being believable, and you tell me, but it really happened that way, then you're going to have to go out into the hall for 5 minutes in time out. Because we all know that the truth is way more bizarre than anything we could make up, right? And it's our job as writers to make it believable. It's our job as writers to take those truths that we find and make them believable for everybody else.
Sorry, I'm a new writer. How do you do that? How do you take the truth and make it believable?
It takes it's difficult, but you have to sometimes tone it down a bit. I sometimes tell people a story that when I was in middle school art class, we took this board that was like this, and you would tape a piece of paper on it, and you'd go outside or inside, and you would sketch on that board. And I was at a loss. I was sitting on this hill at the school like this, and at the bottom of the hill were these groves of trees, and I sat there for 20 minutes trying to think, what am I going to draw? What am I going to draw? So I set my board down, went down and found a leaf, and I thought, well, I'm going to draw this leaf. And I turn around, and a pack of dogs come running over the hill, just not even chasing, just running over the hill. And one of the dogs lands on my board and stops like this and skids halfway down the hill on my board, then tears the paper off and slides the rest of the way on the paper and rips it to shreds. And then I go up to my teacher with my board and my paper, and I said, a pack of dogs just ran over the hill. Right? She didn't believe it. Well, it's your job as a writer, and I can't tell you how to do that. It's your job as a writer to write that scene and make it believable. To make that reader believe every word of it. And I can't tell you how to do that.
Question here in the back.
So Kevin, country music industry control, a long way from Bob Dylan. I threw that out. And also, don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
And what do you think about the 6 degrees of separation and the ability of the internet to actually connect people and get that word of mouth? How many people are you connected to on LinkedIn by now?
Yeah, LinkedIn I'm not very active on. The question was, how does the internet affect that 6 degrees of separation? Well, I can tell you this with John Ely, for example. There are no 6 degrees of separation. It's you and John Ely and everybody else in the world.
I met him twice. He remembered who I was.
Yeah, I mean, he's an amazing guy. But yeah, the internet has that ability where I have on Facebook, I have a presence on Facebook. I'm under Kevin Morgan Watson. I added the Morgan in there, which is my middle name. It's my mom's maiden name, because I found out that the people kept mistaking me for this really good-looking soccer player in England. And there's another guy who writes political books, which I could care less about politics. And another guy who writes for the Methodist Church. And I stay as far away from religion and politics as I can on everything I do. Kevin Morgan Watson on Facebook, and I've got like almost 1,300 friends on there, who I can, let them know what's going on. These are people who found me through Press 53, who keep track with what we're doing. So yeah, it does. It eliminates a lot of that. To give you an example, when we put Mary Akers' book out, Women Up on Blocks, as a pre-order, I posted it on Facebook, and at the time I had about 200 friends. And within 3 weeks, I had over almost 800 friends, and over 1,000 people had clicked on that event. So a lot of people, so it's a great tool. It really is. You no longer have to physically shake hands, though I do like that. I think you have to do that as a writer to be successful. You have to get out places like this. You have to read. You have to meet people, because every person here, like it or not, is going to walk out of here with an opinion about me and my publishing company. And it's my hope that anybody who walks out of here is going to be kind of excited about what I'm doing, will check out what I'm doing, will buy 1 or 2 of our books, and will tell other people about it. And word of mouth is the best advertising anybody could do.
Question all the way in the back here.
Hi, I'm actually, have already signed up to go to the North Carolina Writers Conference.
Yeah.
I heard you say that you're not really interested in doing anything building religion, and I'm writing a Christian-based
Mhm.
book.
Right.
Are most people at the conference going, should I be targeting, a different group of literary?
Different group of writers?
Yeah.
Yeah, the question is that she's going to the North Carolina Writers Network conference next weekend, and she writes primarily Christian fiction, nonfiction, Christian-based writing. And is this a good group? But you'll find all kinds of writers there. It's you'll find from poets to people who write memoirs, to people who write history at length, people who write all genres. So it's not a cliquish group at all. There are no real cliques there. And I think the information you get, the basic information you get, pertains to any kind of writing you're doing. And what you have to do with any conference you go to, any workshop you go to, in fact, we're actually doing a cruise next September. I didn't tell you about that.
Am I invited? Sounds good to me.
Everyone's invited. I don't know the price yet. But we had a cruise company in California contact us about putting together. They'd heard about Press 53 and one of our poets, and asked us to put together this cruise. But anyway, the information you get. Say that one of the workshops we're going to do is the anti-workshop workshop. How do you survive a workshop? I mean, how do you walk out of a workshop and still have that individual voice and that individual outlook and know who you are as a writer and who you want to be as a writer? So when you go to these conferences or workshops, you're going to be exposed to a lot of different ideas. And what you have to do are take the little bits and pieces that you think will work for you and build something unique. Don't try to write for everybody else.
Any business cards, bookmark, resumes, or anything that you would recommend to a new writer or writers going to a conference to be prepared with?
Yeah, business cards, bookmarks, anything you could hand out at a conference and all that. I think it's good to make friends while you're there. Your best calling card is a published story. Your best calling card is if you're writing, for example, a Christian nonfiction piece, and let's say it's a big piece. Think about smaller pieces you can get published somewhere else that fit in with what you're doing. A bio is your best calling card. If you're writing a novel right now, think about some of the themes in that novel and write editorial pieces, write pieces that you could publish in small magazines and journals, blog about it. I'm a big fan. Build a blog. They're free. I mean, you can start your own blog and start writing about what you care about, what you write about, and find your audience, build your audience. I had a lady take a writing class from me a couple of years ago, and I always ask my students, why are you here? What do you hope to accomplish? And she said, well, I guess I've got to write a book. I thought, well, tell me about that. And she said, well, I started caring for my father a few years ago. He has Alzheimer's. And I started this blog just to find other people who were experiencing this and working with their parent or somebody who had Alzheimer's. I was looking for advice. And I visited other blogs and would post what they were writing on my blog. And pretty soon I was linked into all these other blogs. And what I did, because she uses humor, she said, because I use humor to take care of my dad, for example, with an incontinence problem, she'll walk across the room with a glass of water and say, "Oh, Dad, here's a glass of water," and she'll spill it on him and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You should go change. You'll have to go change your pants now. I'm very sorry." Instead of telling him, "Go change your pants." You know, she does something like that. So he gets up and changes his pants and takes care of it. And I started posting little things like this. Well, now I'm getting 7,000 hits a week on my blog, and everybody wants a book. Okay? Now the bells are going off and going, "Oh, wow. What if short story writers did that? What if poets did that? What if somebody writing a Christian nonfiction book was doing that?" And then what if you go to a publisher and say, "Well, I've got this manuscript that I've written about such and such, and I've also got this blog over here, and I'm getting 7,000 hits a week, and everybody wants to buy a book." Now, in this huge stack of submissions this publisher has, where do you think your manuscript's going to go?
The top, yeah.
Exactly. The internet has created so many opportunities for us to move our manuscript to the top of that stack. And we've got to be more creative about how we find our readers. So I encourage people, if you're writing a novel, blog about whatever the topic is. Find some topics of common interest and put it out there and start building your audience. You should be building your audience way before your novel or your book is written.
And by all means, you've probably already done this, but I'd definitely search for like Christian writers, writers conferences, or Christian publishing
Agents.
conferences. Might be. I'm sure there's a trade show. It's a whole other side of the publishing
Huge.
business, and it's
Huge,
a profitable side of the business
Yeah.
as well.
That's like the children's market. It's like so many markets. It's a gigantic market out there, which I know nothing about. Which is
John, do you have a question?
When you review something fiction or nonfiction, and it's your story, how do you protect yourself from any legal ramifications if the story that's supposedly fiction too closely mirrors something that might defame someone? Or that same question related to memoir, where it's actual people?
Yeah, that's a little different, the memoir thing. Get an attorney to look it over as a writer. That's what I would do. If I ran across a manuscript that I would make sure that writer has an attorney that has gone over that manuscript and has advised. We have a nonfiction memoir company. Well, of course it would be nonfiction memoir, wouldn't it?
Usually, unless it's
Yeah, with some memoirs it could be,
You might have just come up with a new genre there, the fictional memoir.
yeah.
My life as a millionaire.
We're coming out with we're publishing a memoir next spring by a lady who traveled the world in the 50s and 60s alone. Traveled the world alone as a professional accordion player. If you can imagine that. 60 some odd countries, almost 70 countries by herself. Because she was a young kid in her 20s and wanted to see the world. And her parents were like, "No, get married, settle down, have kids." And she was like, "I don't want to do that. I want to see the world." And she figured out she was playing trade shows here and traveling over the country on TV shows. She was playing clubs in New York and Chicago and just all over the place. And she ran into a group of guys who were on a cruise ship and jumped on the cruise ship with them and took off for Europe and didn't come home for, traveled all over Europe, Asia, Africa, the whole bit. And a wonderful story. Wonderful story. But she has an attorney. She has an attorney who looked over the manuscript and checked it out closely for anything she might say, because she met some very influential people and some big name people in some high places. So she had to make sure. Now, had she not done that, I would have said, go see an attorney first and have an attorney sign off on this before I'll even consider it. If it's fiction, but it's based on real fact, just make sure the names are changed and you've changed some of the, just mix it up a bit. As long as you say it's fiction, I think you'll be
There's a question over here.
Yeah. One of the things, I'm new to Carolina from New York, and
welcome.
Originally in the music industry, and now I'm also a musician, and what I found was in New York, we used to mix up a lot of our open mics with spoken word poetry as well as music, and we would do all of that. And I found that a lot of musicians that I used to play with in New York were also writers and freelance editors, poets, etc.
Right.
I've never published at this point. I've just been sticking to the music thing. So I'm looking at the possibility of starting with short stories that I can kind of build into, because that's the kind of stuff that I do. I don't think it's the kind of stuff that would be conducive to from what I'm seeing so far, to particularly your publishing company, but I may find that I have to look at several, because I do different style stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Some stuff is very serious and very, very topical, and some stuff that you were saying before about getting to the truth. Sometimes what I do is I make it incredibly funny, and people don't believe it until it becomes deadly serious at the end, and they say, "Oh my God, but that's true," you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, you know, and it holds people's attention, the humor, until they realize it's actually true at the end.
Uh-huh.
So it's kind of a it's one particular style.
Is there a question?
Yeah, the question is, how do I go about connecting? I mean, the workshop that's coming up this week. I probably would like to register for that, although it's too late now. It's next week, isn't it?
It's probably not too late.
It's not too late.
Go ahead.
Where is it located? Do you know?
It's in Wrightsville Beach.
In Wrightsville Beach.
Yeah, go to the North Carolina Writers Network
Right.
website, and all the information's right there.
Because I'm going to need to look at different publishers for different styles.
Yeah, and here's an important thing. When I consider a poetry manuscript or a short story manuscript, my first question is how many of these have been previously published somewhere else? And I want most of them, if not all of them, to be previously published somewhere else. That's going to tell me a couple things. It's going to tell me, number one, that this is a writer who's been at it, who's serious about it. And I'm not looking for validation that this person can write. I can judge that myself. But I want to find out if this person is serious about this. You know, have they been holed up by themselves in a room writing for 4 or 5 years, and they've got this collection, and now they want me to publish the collection? Well, who am I going to sell it to? You know, how is this a person who's going to suddenly emerge from the darkness and go out and shake hands, meet people, and all that? So I want somebody who's out there, who's really out there. So if you've got this collection of stories, start sending the individual stories out and find your markets for those. There are over 1,000 places to submit your poetry and short stories out there. 1,000, more than 1,000. So you can find a home for it, but it's a matter of finding the right home. You know, the first story I had that won a national award, I had sent out probably 8 or 9 times to different publications and got rejections. And I knew I had something because I got some ink. It was like, you know, this story took me to the top of the roller coaster and stalled, you know, but they wrote it, you know, so I knew I had something, you know, sorry, you have to pass, please submit again. If anytime you get ink like that, it's pretty good. Now, with the internet, where a lot of submissions are online, you don't get much of that, but occasionally you might get somebody who will actually type a little note. You know, we passed this time, but keep us in mind, send us some more stuff, and that's a positive, it's a big positive. So you've got to submit your work, get it out there. That tells me if that person is eager and they're working hard. The second thing is that if they have numerous publications, I have a source for blurbs if I publish that book. I have a source of marketing if I publish that book. And I have a writer who knows a lot of other readers out there. There's a built-in source of potential readers who will buy that book. So the first thing I do when I get a submission from someone, if I'm not familiar with their name, is I Google that writer. I'll just do it. Google the writer and see if they pop up. And if I don't see where they're published anywhere and they're not really out there, if you have a blog, it's going to come up. If you're on Facebook, it's going to come up. If you've been published anywhere, pretty much, it's going to come up. And if nothing comes up, then I know I'm dealing with a writer who's really not out there working it. They're not trying to make a name for themselves, which is important. So my first advice to you is to take those stories you've got. Don't worry about the collection. Don't worry about, you know, who's going to read this. Read some other publications, and most of these are online now. Find these places that are publishing stories that are similar to yours, not exact, but might be in tune, and start submitting. putting it out there, throw it out there.
I've got one more question. If anybody else has a question, you can come up and speak with Kevin afterwards, and we're going to try to arm wrestle him into going over to TK Trips afterwards. If you guys want to come over there, maybe we can get him to talk a little bit more over there, a little informally.
I hate to talk.
Two things. So there's a TK Trips. I want everybody to come to that, and then the tip jar. We do have a tip jar. I want to throw a couple of bucks into this. If you've got a few bucks to contribute. And then my final question for you, Kevin, is what does the future hold for Press 53?
Wow. I don't know.
Journey for Joe Dell.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Journey for Joe Dell's coming out in January. This is, something that I try to do. Cheryl and I had a conversation earlier on. This is another thing about putting it out there. Cheryl and I were talking about, are we going to do novels? And I don't read many novels. I really don't. I read short stories. I love short stories. I love that. And I'm so excited that Oprah picked a short story collection, that the National Book Award, 2 of the 5 finalists are short story collections, and the winner of the Pulitzer this year was a short story collection. I'm so excited about that. But when we talked about that, where To Kill a Mockingbird came up, I told Cheryl, I said, yeah, I think we should do novels, but I'm not going to publish one unless it's as good as To Kill a Mockingbird. And she said, well, that's a high standard. And I said, well, if I got to read it 5 or 6 times, it better be good. I don't want to have to be out there pushing something that I'm fed up with it. I'm tired of looking at it. Well, a couple of years ago, John Owen approached me, who's the son of Guy Owen, who's in the Literary Hall of Fame, started the Southern Poetry Review. He wrote Ballad of the Flim Flam Man that was made into the movie in the 60s with George C. Scott. And he said, my dad's books are out of print. Would you be interested in doing that? And it took me back to that conversation I had with Cheryl, where I said, if I found a novel that I loved and it was out of print, I would consider that, absolutely. I think it should be part of our mission to find great literature that is out of print and make sure it stays in print. We have that power. We have that capability now to make sure it's something we really, truly love. And then 2 weeks later, John Ely's book, The Landbreakers, landed in our lap, basically. And I thought, wow, you put it out there, it really does work. Still waiting for the lottery, though. But in a sense, that was when the lottery, because I have a wonderful relationship with John Ely now. And when he's in town, we have lunch once or twice a month, and I'm able to just ask him questions and find out so many neat things. And then I get approached by John Owen, who says, my dad's books are out of print, would you be interested? And I said, well, send me one of his books, because I'd never read any Guy Owen, just like I'd never read any John Ely. And he sent me this great little book called Journey for Joe Dell that was published in 1970. And I read it in the course of an evening. It was like really a novella, almost. And it was nominated for the Pulitzer in 71 or 2. It was 71 or 2. You remember? Okay, it was in that area, but yeah, just a fascinating story about a 13-year-old half Lumbee Indian boy who works as a sharecropper with his parents on a tobacco farm in eastern North Carolina. And this book's out of print, and it's a fascinating story about working, about bringing in a product, about preparing that product, getting that product to market and not getting ripped off, and about earning $1, an honest dollar, and hoping that someday you can have something to call your own. And for years it was required reading in high schools here. But because it has a tobacco theme, of course, I haven't told John this yet, but I've changed tobacco to wine. So, actually no, but it's coming out in January, the 40th anniversary issue. And something else I didn't know, I asked Sally Buckner. I don't know if any of y'all know Sally Buckner. She's a highly revered poet in North Carolina and a dear, dear, dear friend of mine. And I asked her, I said, would you write a new introduction for this book? And she said, I'd be glad to. She said, Guy Owen was my very first creative writing instructor. Wow, was that not cool? So, yeah.
She was the first graduate student, if I understand it right.
He was the first graduate? She was the first graduate student?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so I mean, it's just so nice when you make those connections and everything. But so what's in the future of Press 53? I'm just going to continue finding writing that I love and working with writers who are out there. I want to find writers who are really out there and working and have the publications, who are building a name and a reputation for themselves, and hopefully I can provide a platform for them and a means of drawing more attention to what they're doing. And we can't do it for everybody. I can only publish so many books a year, and believe me, we turn down a lot of really, really good, solid, strong manuscripts from people who deserve to be published, and it just comes down to the matter of choice. You know, what can we do and what can't we do?
I hope you put some ink in there.
What's that?
I hope you put some ink in there.
Meaning?
The ones you turned down, you wrote a little note.
Oh yeah, always. Yeah, I think that's one thing you'll find with that we try to make it personal. You know, we try to, you know, I don't have any kind of stock rejection letter in my database at all. I try to sit down and write a note and say, you know, it was good, and I'll let them know right up front if it's a good fit or not a good fit. And if we hang on to it for a while, it means we're considering it. So.
Do you pay an option at that point?
No, but we pay very nice royalty. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. How about a round of applause for Kevin?
Thank you. Thank you. Whenever you submit, you can say I've written all these articles, whenever you pseudonym. Yeah, that's important. Yeah. If just something I should have mentioned is that whenever you're writing your bio, don't be.
Make something outrageously funny.
Well, yeah, in your bio or whenever you're writing a cover letter to the editor, to the publisher, don't be shy. There's no room for shyness.
Sexual references and it attracts the average guy in the streets kind of attention as opposed to somebody who's a literary person who's looking to read good literature. I'm looking to get this stuff out of people who don't read. So the people who like don't read, who like dirty pictures and stuff like that, will read this stuff. At the end, they'll realize. So you can make political commentary guys who don't read. So like the only thing they read is the jokes on the bathroom wall. So you start your story off kind of like a joke on the bathroom wall, and then you kind of like shape it into something that's real. And then at the end of the story, they realize that.
So what they're going to do is like rip up the whole story.
It's really not funny at all.
I mean, you know, typewritten
Guys who want to read Hustler and Esquire and Playboy and shows on the bathroom. You put your politics in there. You know, and that's why those articles, like when Playboy interviews Jimmy Carter, everybody reads that.
No, but I mean, just like,
well, you know what I mean? That's, you know, so it's kind of that kind of approach to the common guy who you're not going to find.
You come here at the beginning.
It would be quite that.
It just never comes in. And when it does, we had that.
My name is Ken, by the way. I'm sorry.
I'm Sherry.
Sherry, nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you.
I get your phone.
Okay.
Emailing and stuff like that, so we're at the
Joanna has this child.
she was great. She did
So like, you know, all these concerts and stuff, I ride it once in a while. It's really nice to say.
you know, she says, I'm not worried about it.
Well, yeah, and the Greensboro Review's remarkable. You've got the Greensboro Review, hundreds of other reviews out there who publish individual
And I have
forms
that
and
same
things like
feeling.
that. And that's where you go to build that catalog.
Whatever we decide to
So when you submit to me, and I can publish a Greensboro Review, Harper's Ferry, Shenandoah, Missouri Review, oh, you know, contests, you know, contests are really not much fun.
basically, it's authorized the wiring.
We've got a contest line that I'm probably not.
Yeah, the first 53 open awards. Yeah, and I should have probably mentioned it. I didn't mention the names. But yeah, the magazines and journals are who you want to submit.
Oh, that's great.
Looks like you got a free buy right there.
Yeah, on LinkedIn, that's a game for me. I'm starting to get my traffic. He's got my
Well, he's got some
Group class page mercy on.
Can I grab a few?
But on
Oh, sure, yeah, whatever you need. Whatever you need.
on Facebook, I started posting out some middle
Chris's things are called so.
We got, okay, good.
Since I was talking about mental health issues, people contacted me. It's not like I'm not like a lot of people on Facebook, people I'm not into or into a lot of these. So it's a fun game. Lately, I'm just the DJ. And then, you know, with a punchline.